Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, and thanks for joining us again today for another episode of the RockLove Magazine Podcast, where we celebrate the zine that ran between 1995 and 2001, aptly named after a Todd Rundgren and Utopia tune. And as you all know, we celebrate all music, really, not just that era. And today we have a great guest, a very special new friend of the show, somebody who's a part of that Todd Rundgren community, and we're going to ask him all about the good stuff from behind the scenes. Bruce McDaniel. Hey, man.
Hey, how you doing?
Great,
Glad
thanks.
to be
Great.
here.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thanks. Great to have you. So let's start with the fun stuff. Give us a little background, where you're from, growing up, how'd you get into music, all that fun stuff.
Sure. I'll give you the relatively short form. So I grew up in New York City and surrounding areas. You know, as one moves about, you live in different places, but I lived mostly in and around the city. And my parents were both musicians. They met at Julliard and were like sort of big deal musicians
Whoa,
at the
whoa.
time. And yeah, and when I was born, my mom sort of semi-retired from performing, and uh, she would do the odd thing here and there, but mostly sort of gave way to being a mom full time. But was always an amazing musician, and she would accompany singers or accompany dance recitals or things that didn't require a tremendous amount of long-term commitment. And and my dad stayed a working musician until he pretty much got sick of the business, because it is a business that can bring you down, especially if you have a mortgage and a family and you're always worried about where your next paycheck is coming from and stuff like that. So I was relatively discouraged from being a musician as a kid by my dad, who didn't want me to have to deal with a lot of the nonsense that goes along with the business.
Right. So it
Um,
wasn't it wasn't that he didn't want you to be a musician. He didn't want to put you in that situation, right?
he didn't want me to have it as a job, but I was constantly encouraged to play music in the house. And when I started having bands rehearsing in the house, that's always a trying moment for the parents, because A, you're not very good. B, you're really way too loud. And C, your choice of music is not usually what your parents would want you to be playing. And I checked all those boxes. Um, and But my dad never like came in and said turn it down, or maybe you should practice before plugging in those instruments. He would, if it was really intense and we were working through some Black Sabbath, he would just go out and take a walk or whatever, and never said anything discouraging about playing. And when it became relatively evident that I wanted to do it more than as just a fun thing to do with my friends, I did get a good amount of good advice. And it was great having two really, really skilled and really educated musicians in the house, because I was able to ask questions that I would have needed to go to music school to get the answers for. And I'm lucky that I had that experience, because uh, a lot of my friends that are, self-taught or whatever, don't have the academic bits, right? They don't read music well. They don't understand harmony or arranging or things like that. But I was always able to ask questions of my parents, which was fantastic. And I became very good at uh, writing music, not composing music, but like writing it down. And that became my chore. I didn't have to mow the lawn or anything like that. I had to transcribe songs that my mom wanted to play, because she hated writing music. So she would hear some song on the radio, Alfie or something, and say, go write that out for me. And I would go write it out for her, and she'd pay me like $1 a page to write it out. And that was my chore. and consequently, I still really love the act of physically writing music, and I do it a lot. And now I use a computer most of the time, but there's something beautiful about handwritten music that I still really, really appreciate, and I try to do it
Will you
as often.
tell me a little bit more about that? So, what is it? What is it? What is the difference in the language when you put it on paper? And again, it's not a composition. It's a transcription. So, like,
Yeah.
what does it do for your brain? What does it do for your understanding of the song and the music when you do that?
So it really, really trains your ear, more than anything else, because when you've been grinding through the sort of hunt and peck method of figuring out what chord something was, you start to develop your ear, and then you start to develop the ability to just hear it and go, okay, well, that's an E flat major 7, over G and blah, blah, blah. And you just write it down, and you're not sitting at a piano trying to muscle your way through it, which you have to go through that process at some point. But to be able to just hear a song and then be able to play it is a very, very useful skill for a musician of any kind to have. And the more professional musicians you're around, the more it just sort of becomes the expectation that we're going to run through this song once, and that's it. You're expected to be able to play it thereafter. And so
I had an experience with that last year. I'm producing this documentary, and they asked us here in Vegas at the Smith Center if we wanted one of the songs from our score, because the guy who did it is a big shot locally, for them to perform at this thing they do every summer. And that's exactly what happened, because I went and they did the rehearsal once. And then they came back and played it later that night. All these pros they hired locally, and I was like, "How the hell do they do that?"
And we will do that with Todd. If Todd wants to add a song, we'll just do it in sound check and be like, "All right, I guess we're doing it then," and you just have to do it. And it doesn't matter that there's 1,000 people in front of you. It's just the job. And so you get to this situation where you start to expect that of yourself, right? But you never want to lose that muscle. Muscles atrophy, right? So you're constantly, as a musician, trying to learn new songs, not because you think you'll ever have to play that song, but it's exercising that muscle. So I'll hear something interesting on the radio and go, "Oh, that's cool." Radio. Who listens to the radio anymore? But in some context, and I'll immediately run to the piano to just see how it's constructed, right? Not because I ever think I'm going to play that song in front of anybody or even learn the whole song, but something in it triggers that little muscle, in your brain that says, figure that out. That's weird and interesting, and it's doing something that you didn't expect. Sit down and do it. That happens to me with Radiohead a lot, where I'll listen to something on some Radiohead song and I'll go, what is going on there? That it's because it's sneaky, it sounds like there's not that much to it, but then you try and figure it out and your mind is blown because it's so much more complex than you originally thought, because they trick you.
I do the same thing with them. I'm not a musician, but I listen to that shit over, and I listen to Johnny's movie scores over and over and over, because there's something so complex just listening to it all.
Yeah. So, consequently, by the time I was a teenager, I was getting pretty good at doing all that stuff, and I heard on the radio. So I started building a studio in my bedroom, my teenage bedroom. I disassembled my bed and my furniture and just put it out in the hallway, and had my friend bring a drum set in, and I had a couple of microphones, and I was, hanging them on the ceiling. And, my teenage bedroom looked like the gatefold of something, anything, right? And I didn't have mic stands, so I had like a broom, with a duct taped microphone on it and all of that stuff. And I hadn't seen something, anything yet at this point. So it really resonated when I actually did see that. But my dad was cool. He was like, didn't complain that there was a disassembled bed in the hallway, and he knew that I was up to something. But so I didn't have any means of multi-track recording, because that was in 1974, thereabout, was very expensive technology that consumers didn't really have the access to. You had a recording studio. You paid money to go to the recording studio to do multi-track recording. And so I bought two regular cassette machines, and I would bounce tracks from one cassette machine to one channel of the other cassette machine while I was recording something on top of it, and then bounce those two channels back to the original machine on one channel and overdub something on top. And I started really getting involved in tearing records apart and trying to figure out what was happening there, particularly Beatles records, and trying to replicate those sounds. And one night on the radio in 1976, I heard Good Vibrations, but it wasn't Good Vibrations. It was Todd's Good Vibrations from Faithful. And it blew my mind, because I said, here's somebody that's doing for real what I'm trying to do. We didn't have the internet. We didn't know that things were like this were going on, and people were doing crazy stuff like this. And when I heard that on the radio, it was on WNEW late at night in New York, and where they would play weird stuff. There was a show late at night. The DJ was this guy, Vince Scelsa, and he used to play this stuff in the wee hours that he couldn't get away with playing during the day. And so he played Good Vibrations and Strawberry Fields off of Faithful. And I ran out the next day to buy the record, to try and learn how Todd had disassembled this stuff and built it. I had never had a Todd record before. I never heard, I probably had heard of the name, but it was not part of my musical experience yet. And I put the record on immediately to listen to the covers side, right? And was fascinated by it. And I said, well, let me listen to this other side. And I flipped it over and completely lost my mind, because the non-cover side of Faithful is one of the greatest sides of music ever. Love of the Common Man, Cliche, it's just incredible stuff. Verb to Love. You'd be hard pressed to find another side of an album that has Absolutely. That much music.
And don't you think the other side was unique too, in that he was trying to as faithfully cover those as possible, where everybody else who would do that at the time was trying to make them different, and Todd was like, let me see if I can do this perfect like they do it.
Yeah, and on top of it, there was it was not humorless. Like, it was done with a wink. Like, you could hear him having fun with the process and enjoying it. It wasn't just a bland reproduction of it. There was stuff in there that was definitely had some eyebrows on it, so I became obsessed with the originals side. And the first Todd song that I taught myself was Cliche. And so you learn a lot about Todd's compositional technique if you learn a song like that, because it has a lot.
Let me ask you again, as a non-musician, every time I ask it, so I'm a non-musician. So we hear it, just again, audibly, but what's the complexity of Todd's songs and writing and the underpinnings compared to other stuff that you?
Yeah, Todd has a unique vocabulary. He's not a schooled musician. He's found the core elements that make up his language of songwriting. And the vast majority of his work sticks to this toolkit that he has that was basically in my view of things, forged by, and I don't say this word disparagingly, I say it, in fact, with admiration, forged by his limitations, right? That he knew how to put his hand in this position on the keyboard and move it around and make sounds that he liked. And he does the same thing on the guitar. The positions that he uses on the guitar are a very specific toolkit. And it takes musicians a long time to figure out what he's doing, because he's not doing things in a traditional way. He's doing things in his language. And Cliché is a wonderful example of that language. It's dressed up a lot more than a lot of his songs. Like it's hidden by the beauty of the song a lot more. But you'll hear the same language in Can We Still Be Friends that you hear in Compassion. You'll hear the same language in Cliché that you hear in Common Man, but they're completely different songs, and they're presented in such a way that language is just a means of getting his thoughts to you, right? That's his toolkit to do so. So, I taught myself most of the songs on that record, and I said, all right, well, now I gotta go out and get more records. And I was 13, 14 years old, didn't have a lot of disposable income, but found ways to get the money to
man,
go.
Those are the days. It's like my whole after school job went to records and weed, and that's all I needed, and I was fine.
Yeah, and like, God forbid you should have to buy a double album. You had to save up twice as much. The first album I bought was the White Album with my own money. First album I bought with my own money was the White Album. And I remember like the anguish of, I could buy 2 albums or this one, but it was the time and I needed to get the White Album. Anyway, so I went back and started going through the Todd catalog at that point. And I didn't do it in any sensible order because, again, we didn't have the internet, so I didn't know what came out when and, whatever. So I got, over the course of the next couple of months, I got Todd and Something Anything. And all of the piano stuff on Something Anything particularly forced me to learn a little bit about how to play the piano. Right, because I could figure out notes and things like that and figure out chords on the piano, but I couldn't really play the piano. And I needed to decipher, Marlene or Hello, It's Me or whatever. And I had to figure that stuff out. And consequently, my piano vocabulary is pretty much Todd's piano vocabulary, right? In fact, I said to Todd one day, Todd, I learned to play piano listening to you. And he said, I'm so sorry, right? Because he knew what that meant, is that right. I'm stuck with his vocabulary too, right? But it's such an incredible vocabulary. And it's only limiting if you limit yourself with it. He never limited himself with it. He just had that vocabulary and built incredible music with it. So it's like if you're a painter, but say, I'm only going to use primary colors. Well, okay, you can make it look like a kid's kindergarten drawing, or you can be Juan Miro, right? So it's your choice to use that palette that you have wisely, and he used it incredibly. So I went through all of that oeuvre, and went back to the Runt albums, and then went forward. There was a period of a couple of years where probably I only listened to maybe 3 or 4 albums in rotation, and they would have been like A Wizard, A True Star, which I had on cassette. God help me, because it wore down very quickly. And a couple of Utopia albums that I just, were in permanent rotation. I had them in my backpack. I'd listen to them on the subway and go through it. And
so what about the difference of Wizard and the snippets and the deconstruction and all this stuff? That, I mean, you'd never heard that before.
Yeah, but that all made good sense to me because especially as somebody who, like I said, the first album that I bought was the White Album, which had pastiches of things in it. Having modern classical musicians in my house meant that I listened to a lot of 20th century like musique concrète, like Edgar Varese and things like that, that use tape loops and weird sounds and edits and all kinds of things. So all of that stuff resonated really easily with me. It all made good sense. And the short attention span aspect of it made sense to me too, because I was a kid devouring stuff and I just wanted more and more and more of it. And around this time, when it became clear that I was pretty obsessed with this stuff, and I remember my dad coming in one time, and I was working on some Todd tune, and I had been playing it probably for 2 hours on the piano to try. It was probably a Ballad of Denny and Jean, and him just going, "You've got it. You can stop playing it now. You've got it." That was perfect. But it was hours, I'd spend playing this stuff. And he said to me roughly around this time, he said, "Look, if you're going to be a musician, the only important advice that I'm going to give you is prepare for the gig that you want. And that means prepare for it expecting you'll never get it, right? But prepare, because on the incredibly off chance that that gig presents itself to you and you're not ready to take it, you're not prepared for it, you'll spend the rest of your life kicking yourself." And my dad knew plenty of people like, that when Miles Davis called and said, I want you to come and audition for my band, they were like, I can't, I'm not ready. And then the rest of their life, it was like, I could have been in Miles Davis's band, so I learned every Todd song that I could. I learned every Black Sabbath song, knowing full well I was not going to replace Tony Iommi, but you never know. And things like that. And I learned a mountain of Frank Zappa music. And
so let me ask you a question. So do you discover the same things with these other musicians that you're finding out with Todd, that they each have their own language, or some do and some are more educated? Or
yeah, absolutely. Zappa certainly has a very specific language. And so does Tony Iommi. The difference is that, like with Zappa, he figured out pretty early on how to absorb stuff from the other musicians in his band and like regurgitate it. Whereas Todd was doing it all sort of internally, like he was making it all himself and creating this bubble around him that was populated by all things that he did himself, which was amazing, which is why the prog Utopia stuff, the early Utopia stuff, is so wild, because now he's got all these musicians around him that are all incredibly skilled musicians, and yet he still found a way to make it sound like Todd Rundgren music. That's an incredible achievement, to take all those keyboard players playing all at the same time and it still sounds like your song.
I used to think the same thing about in the late '80s shows with all the backup singers and Luther Vandross and everything.
Yeah, surely.
Somehow they managed to do that without those people taking over the stage.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So I learned a lot of this music and had a life of playing in various punk rock bands in New York and doing orchestral music here and there and doing jazz arrangements for people and things like that. And about it would have been 2005 or 2006, probably 2005, I guess, was on my way to go see an Ed Palermo big band show where they play the music of Frank Zappa, jazz big band playing the music of Frank Zappa. And a friend of mine was the bass player in the band. And I was getting dressed to go see the show. And he called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Oh, I'm coming to see you play tonight." He goes, "Yeah, would you want to fill in tonight and be the singer for the show?" And I was like, "Wait, the show's in like an hour." He goes, "Yeah, well, so our singer's got laryngitis and da da da." And I couldn't think of anybody else that knows all this Zappa music. And so I said, stupidly, no sane person would have said yes to this. But stupidly, I said yes. And he goes, "Great. Okay, I'm going to have Ed call you." And so Ed calls me in a couple of minutes and says, "Yeah, hey, Paul tells me that you know every Frank Zappa song." And I was like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 slow down. That's a big catalog. I'm highly conversant in the material, but what do you want to do?" And he reels off a bunch of songs, and I was like, "Okay, okay. Well, I don't know the words, but I'll print them out, and he goes, "Okay, sound check's in a half an hour. See you there." And so I go do the sound check, and I didn't realize I had never done an Ed Palermo big band sound check before, and I didn't realize that it consisted of playing like the first 8 bars of each song and going, "Yeah, that's fine. Okay, next, da da da." So basically, hit the stage with no prep, no rehearsal, no sound check, and did the show, and it was fine. It was good.
Because you
But
prepared
again,
for the show, right?
because
Like
I
your
was
dad
prepared,
said.
because I had imagined myself in Zappa's band so many times that I had rehearsed this already. Uh, and 20 years later, I'm still in the band, and I've gotten to play with all of the Zappa alumni and, play all this incredible music that, had I not been able to answer that phone call with a ridiculous answer of yes, I never would have had that experience. And that experience led to a night where we were doing a record release for an album we made called The Adventures of Zodd Zundgren, which was an album that is a mashup of Todd Rundgren and Frank Zappa music, because Ed is also a huge Todd fan, in addition to being a Zappa fan.
Well, that's an interesting thing. All Todd fans are Zappa fans, and pretty much vice versa. I've always found that a unique thing.
And it's a remarkable thing because they're so different attitude-wise. And Ed actually put this on the liner notes, and he said, as a teenager, those two artists got him through teenage angst, because some girl would reject him or break up with him, and he would listen to some Todd song that would pour his heart out, and make him feel all the feels. And then he'd immediately put on a Frank Zappa song that would tell him that broken hearts are for assholes, right? So he would balance his world. And it does somehow provide this weird yin-yang balance musically, where you do have this incredible crossover of fans, myself included. So we were doing the CD release party for this record, and lo and behold, walking into the Iridium Jazz Club in New York City, I see Todd Rundgren in tow of Greg Bissonette, the drummer from the Ringo's All-Star Band, among many, many incredible credits. Greg, a friend of us, the band as a whole, but he dragged Todd. They had just had like their post-tour dinner with Ringo, and said, "Todd, you got to come see this band. They're great." Unbeknownst to him, we were doing a night of Todd's music mashed up with Zappa. So I see them coming down, and I'm like, "Oh, holy cow." Now, I had met Todd once before, I think, at that point. And they come and park themselves like right at my feet. And
And it's not like Todd is a small presence or anything.
No, he's not. No, you can definitely see him coming into the room. And this was several songs into the set they came in. And I look at my set list and I'm like, oh no. The next song I have to sing is Hello, It's Me. And I've got to sing it with Todd sitting right in front of me. Now, our version of Hello, It's Me is sort of structured on the Nas version of Hello, It's Me. So it's much slower and it has the vibes in it and a very different sort of vibe. So we launch into it and I see Todd go, yeah, because nobody does the Nas version. Everybody does the Something Anything version. And I was like, all right, okay, all right, okay. He's not having a bad time. All right, we're going to be okay. A couple more songs in. Todd seems to be having a really good time. And I get cocky. And I say, hey, Todd, you want to come up and do a song? Fully expecting him to say, absolutely not. This is your show. You did. Todd's like, sure, and bounces up on stage. And I look at the set list and try and determine which songs in the set list are closest in arrangement or in structure, rather, to the original so that I won't have to explain it to Todd. Like he can just sing it normally. There'll be all this other jazz stuff going on in the background, but at least the structure of the song will be like the record. So I look and I was like, okay, you want to do Emperor of the Highway? And he's like, yeah, because who does that? Nobody. So I said, do you know the words? He goes, nope. So I had my iPad, so I bring up the lyrics and I kind of point them at him. And I said, do you want to, it's a two-part thing. There's a counterpoint vocal and the main vocal. I said, do you want to do the main vocal or the counterpoint? He goes, I'll do the counterpoint. You do the main vocal. I was like, okay. So we do it. He nails it. It's great. And I figure, okay, now he's going to walk off. And he doesn't go anywhere. He's still there. I was like, okay. How about Song of the Viking? It's like, yeah. He goes, I know the words of that. I was like, okay, great. So we kick into Song of the Viking and he just kills it. He gives it like full operatic, overblown version of Todd. He really delivered. And then he took his leave of the stage and then stayed for the rest of the show. But the fascinating part of that experience for me was not that Todd came up and did whatever, but that it was my show. And so I wasn't anxious about it. Like I wasn't performing for him at that point. I was providing infrastructure for him to perform on top of, and I was in charge. And when I'm in charge, I'm not nervous and anxious. I'm focused and professional. And so he definitely got to experience that, at least to know that I'm competent, that I understand his music reasonably well, that kind of thing. So I think when things came back around, now Jesse Gress was a good friend of the band. In fact, we had on numerous occasions, I have an amazing mile-long email thread between us and Jesse trying to get it together to get him to come and do a whole night of Todd music with the big band. And we could just never get our schedules to merge. But we had picked songs and we'd gone through this thing. And Jesse had seen the band.
You were prepared, like you said, right? For the moment.
Exactly. So when Jesse initially got sick, it was right after Kasim had come and done a whole night of Utopia music with the big band, which was super fun. Kaz was great. He will tell you that he felt underprepared, because when you're doing a show with a big band like that, it's different than doing a show with a 4-piece rock band or a 5-piece rock band, where your normal thing all of a sudden is thrust into a totally different context. And so he came off the stage afterwards and he's like, "Oh man, you guys were great. I don't feel like I did the best job of preparing for this." And I was like, "Kaz, you were amazing," because he's always amazing. And the audience loved it. So Kaz got to see me do my thing, got to see me do arrangements for the band for all of the Utopia songs, etc. So Jesse and Kaz at that point were about to go out for a Kasim's Utopia tour. This is now it was going to be at the beginning of 2020. This is the end of 2019, and the news starts to make it that that Jesse is sick and is not going to be able to do the tour, right? So I get a call from Kaz, said, "Would you be available to do this Kasim's Utopia tour?" And I said, "Of course." And we're just starting to hear bits and pieces about COVID at this point, but it's kind of like a goof, like, oh, it's another bird flu or whatever. Yeah, the people are getting sick, but it's just the news is blowing it out.
It'll be gone in 15 days, he said.
It'll be gone in a couple of weeks. We'll be fine. So I start learning all the Utopia material for this Kasim's Utopia show, and I'm on stage at sound check of an Ed Palermo gig, and I see my phone ring, and it's Kasim. And so I'm in the middle of a sound check, but I'm like, I got to answer this because this is my next 3 months, And Kaz goes, "Hey, would you be available to do a Todd show right before the Kasim's Utopia tour?" And I was like, "Of course. Well, who would say no to that?" He goes, "Well, just be careful. It's on a cruise, first of all, and it's an unpredictable show. So you'll have to learn like 75 songs, and we don't know which ones Todd is going to call, and it's a lot, and it's in 3 weeks or whatever." I said, "It's okay. We'll do it." So again, a sane person would have said no, but I'm long past that point. So we go to get together and do this. Oh, also no rehearsal, just meet on the boat and play the shows.
Okay, so then you're not getting a time or a chance to get a sense of what Todd's like as a band leader ahead of time, because this isn't just somebody jumping up on stage for a second with you.
So. Right. Well, my only sense of it was meeting Todd in wherever we embarked from, rather, in Fort Lauderdale or Miami or wherever it was, and me immediately screwing up by leaving my passport in the other van, because I had left one of my bags in the other van, and we get to the checkpoint because we were going to, we needed to show our passports to get on the boat, basically, because we were going to Haiti and wherever, and so immediately I make a fool of myself in front of Todd, and he chastised me a little, but he was nice about it. And then that was pretty much it. Like, it didn't really see much of him in the employer-employee relationship until the show. And again, no rehearsal. We played 2 shows, full 2-hour shows on the boat, and did our thing, and it went as well as one of those things can go while everything's sloshing around on stage. And everybody seemed pretty happy about the whole thing. And it was me, Todd, Kasim, Greg Hawkes, and Prairie. So, it was chill and everything was good. Everybody seemed happy. But as we're out there, if you remember back to that point, this was like February 26th or something, 2020. Right about that point, things were starting to get weird. And if you remember, at that point, there was a cruise ship where everybody had COVID and they wouldn't let it dock.
Yep.
And so we're reading this in the news while we're on this boat, and we're going, they're never going to let us off this boat. We're going to be out here forever. And we got like a tap on the shoulder that said, all the artists get down in the lobby at 4:00 in the morning. We're going to get you off the boat. Because obviously they would have to keep paying us if they kept us on the boat. So they got us all off the boat.
They had incentive.
As far as I know, the regular passengers, they could still be out there right now. I have no idea. We just got off the boat, and they hustled us into vans and got us out of there, off to the airports. And so they go home briefly for a couple of days, and then we go out for the Kasim's Utopia tour. And I forget how many shows we were supposed to do, but I don't think we got more than halfway through the tour before all the venues started closing. And we were in St. Louis, or I forget where it was. And I think the next stop was Nashville. And we were going to play at the City Winery in Nashville. And all the other city wineries had been closing. So Nashville still hadn't closed, but Kaz made the wise decision to shut it down at that point, because by the time we got there, we probably wouldn't have been able to play a show, and we would have spent the money on the transportation and hotels and everything else. So we cut the tour short halfway through, which is a shame because we were getting really good. Like there are a couple of videos on YouTube, like the one from Daryl's house.
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's a pretty good show. Like we were hitting our stride, and we were having fun. And it's really a shame because I would have liked to have seen what those next couple of weeks worth of shows would have been like. But at that point,
are any of you, as this is happening, is anybody going, like all of the rest of us in the world, going like, what the fuck are we going to do, and how are we going to work? And
so, we were still at the point where we were kind of making light of it, because we hadn't gone into like actual lockdown yet. In fact, the first show we did, I think it was in DC, or at least in the DC area. We pulled into like a Starbucks for a coffee stop, and Gil had been sick since the cruise. Now, Gil wasn't playing with Todd on the cruise. He was playing with Jason Sheff on the cruise. But he started feeling sick on the way home to Portland from the cruise. And by the time he got back to New York to leave for the Kasim's Utopia tour, Gil was pretty sick. And we were joking, oh, we should, put plastic up and keep him in the back of the van. And, but we weren't serious. And we get to this Starbucks, and Gil's coughing, and, we're reading stories on the news, and Gil goes pretty loudly. We're all in line at the Starbucks, and Gil goes, I could have it right now. And everybody took 3 steps away from him in line. We were like, Gil, you can't say that. Like, some of these people are taking this really seriously. But we started obviously realizing that it was getting more serious and more serious as the tour went on. And I think we really still felt like, and I remember Kaz saying pretty much this, that we'll wait a couple of weeks, and maybe a month or 2 at the most, and then we'll go back and finish the tour. Well, it didn't work out that way. The lockdown lasted, and the venue stayed closed, and it didn't happen. And Kaz wound up making up some of those shows with different guys playing because we were not available for whatever reasons, at that point. And I was on the hook to learn Wizard of True Star at that point, because Todd had basically planned a summer tour of Wizard, which I think eventually became Individualist of True Star, right? But I was on the dime to learn Wizard for that. But because the summer tour didn't happen, It actually gave Jesse time to, to recuperate a bit and then get his transplant, his lung transplant. So in the meantime, Todd is still scheming for how to continue working. And Todd doesn't do it the way anybody else does. He comes up with something that nobody else has ever planned to do, which was a virtual tour. And so we did.
Did you before you go on, did you do the drive-in tours with Kasim or no?
Which one?
The drive-in shows?
No, didn't do those.
Okay.
So we get the word that Todd wants to do Nearly Human virtually from Chicago, streaming around the country. And with an 11-piece band, he doesn't do anything halfway. When he gets an idea, he goes for it. And so we were holed up in these condos basically in Chicago. Now, when you say that, it was Chicago in the winter. We weren't really going to go outside anyway, but most of the restaurants and bars and stuff were closed. So we just kind of made a big, happy quarantined family in these condos, and we would go make dinner in different people's rooms, and it was a very unusual tour.
And none of you at this point professionally had parked yourself in any one spot to perform for this long, right? For 7 or 8 weeks.
No, that was crazy. It was really enjoyable to not have to reset up your gear every time, to not have to, to change anything about your routine, right? You show up, you pick up your guitar, everything sounds the way it sounded last night, and you just do it again. That was really interesting, but it was strange to do it for an audience that was mostly made up of TV screens.
What was that like? That was
7 humans in the room. Yeah, 7 humans in the room.
And when I was talking to Prairie's like, you're sitting there watching out, and people either look like this or they look like this,
Well, you'd also see people like cooking their dinner. You'd see people in a dark room because they wanted to watch, the screen bright, but turn down the lights in the room. So all you see is like their face lit by the screen that you're performing. It was weird.
Todd came up with the idea of trying to do like a tour, turning the tour into something that was always staged from one venue, but we would turn the stage into whatever city we would normally have been on tour, like Minneapolis or something. You'd have slides of different venues or different architectural parts or parks, or the geography of Minneapolis behind us while we were doing that show. The next night we played, I think, 27 shows, so over 7 weeks, all in the same venue. It was kind of I think it was sort of a rave nightclub disco in Chinatown, Chicago. And it was in the middle of the winter. We got there in like early February, and it was just blizzard after blizzard after blizzard. And nobody had their vaccinations yet. But we did know a couple Todd fans who had a connection with a pharmacist who said, if you guys get in here, right when I tell you to go, I'll give you guys and I said, I'm signed up. I want to go in. So I got the first one. And then I told Todd, I said, this girl said she would give it to you right away. Can't remember her name right now. I'm sorry to say. Stephanie? No, it wasn't Stephanie. Anyway, she got me, and then she got Todd like 3 days later. He goes, I hate shots, but this one's going in. So it was so they arranged this showcase in this big theater, and they got video monitors, and they signed up people through the internet to be able to sign up to either be on screen with us, watching us, and we would watch them, or they would just sign up and hear the show, not be on screen. But it was bizarre because I had just come from double knee surgery. I had both of my knees replaced, full knee replacement.
Wow.
2 months before. So I was hobbling. I was still hobbling and a little worried about sitting down for, 2.5 hours. And it was a long show. It was like 2.5 hour show. Clearly Human, it was called. It was most of the material was from Nearly Human. And I think he's got some of that coming out on his new global, what is it? His new platform.
Oh, cool. Can't wait.
Global Nation. Yeah, I think he has. You can subscribe to it and watch some of those shows. I think he's got them. They're going to start coming up on that, as opposed
So
to.
how was that as an experience? Because you never parked yourself in one place for 7 weeks to do shows every other night like that.
Well, we all stayed in an apartment building. Everyone had their own apartment, and we would spend time after the shows, and we would have one day off. We'd do 2 shows on and 1 day off, 2 shows on, 1 day off. Everything was always organized about the city that we were doing. They'd have fans would say, like, what city are we performing for tonight? And they would send backstage all of the memorabilia from that city. Like one city was St. Louis, and one of the fans sent me a Chuck Berry hat, like one of those captain's hats he used to wear all the time. And he goes, well, that's for Prairie because we're playing in St. Louis right now. Oh, we are? Oh, not Chicago. No, it's for St. Louis. So we'd have to kind of remember where we were.
I was approached by, I forget how it worked out, but I did one of the first live concerts in the country at the Tupelo Music Hall up in Massachusetts. That was one. It was one of the first concerts in the U.S. That people attended, and they had to stay in their cars in the parking lot. And it was an outdoor show. It was really cool. And then, after that, the next year, 2021, was when we did the Clearly Human tour, and Todd just got an idea that wouldn't it be great because still there was no touring, nobody was touring.
No, we had the sports leagues playing in empty stadiums and shit. It was awful. Yeah.
I had done some solo shows in 2020 where there was plexiglass between the stage and the audience, and it was just it was. And then the stage it shows, and I'm going to play in my basement, and whatever. I mean, you just make it work. But it was a difficult time. And the Clearly Human was Todd's attempt to try to place a little normalcy into something that was completely abnormal and make it seem like not to pretend that everything is okay, but just to just to give people a little bit of a respite from the craziness that was the COVID pandemic. So we parked in Chicago for a month and a half and played at the same place. We did it so that Todd's idea was to do it like we were playing in each city, like whether it's LA or Chicago or Boston or Miami or wherever. And our start times were coordinated with whatever city we were supposed to be playing in that night. And it was pretty cool. We had a really, really good time doing that show.
But I was going to say, when we're looking at, and it was a big band, giant band, 3 background singers, horns, guitar. And it was Bruce McDaniel's first show, first tour with us. Actually, he had played one show with us on a cruise that Jesse couldn't do. So we'd already met him and we knew him, but that was the first full time we got to know Bruce, and we love him. He's an excellent human being and a wonderful guitar player. But the thing that was weird was we're all looking out at these screens, and everybody's head is either like mine, which is like this, hi, or it's like this, and everyone's like eating their food, but that screen is like 6 feet wide out there in the audience. So that was a little distracting, I gotta say. But we
That's
we got
funny.
over it. Todd would say like, "Hey, put that burger down. Quit eating that thing while we're playing." Stuff like
Funny.
that.
How does the thing change and morph and whatnot over the 7 weeks?
Well, about halfway through, there was a vaccine. Okay. And the vaccine initially was for people over 70. So Todd got it. I think Prairie got it. And
Prairie makes it seem like the woman was a drug dealer. Like we know this woman and she can get us shots.
Well, so Rex, Todd's son, was like our COVID officer. So he would come and swab us every day and, things like that. But it definitely felt like there was some subterfuge in getting the vaccine. Like we got it really quickly with very little hassle. I didn't get it, but all we cared about was that Todd got it, because if Todd gets sick, we got a problem. If any of the rest of us get sick, they'll just put us behind a plexiglass wall on stage. It'll be fine. But once Todd got the vaccine, a lot of the pressure was off and the anxiety was gone. And right about then, certain things started opening in Chicago. So we were able to go out for like walks because the weather started to get a little nicer, and, we could go out and have a burger or something like that. And that was a major mental improvement. And it definitely shows in the later shows that we're much more relaxed, and they were always good shows and they were always fun. But I think by the latter part, to look out and see 30 people in the crowd felt like we had 1,000 people in the crowd, because we were so used to playing for 5 or 6 people. But when the vaccine came out and people could, if they could show their vaccine card, we increased the capacity like 30 or 35, I forget what it was. And so we would have 30 people, and it was like, oh my God, a real audience.
It was like being in high school playing little gigs.
Are you kidding? It felt like Madison Square Garden at that point. So that definitely kind of buoyed our spirits. But it was really lovely what the fans...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you know if that show that's online on YouTube, is that one of the earlier shows or one of the later shows?
There's a couple of shows. Yeah, there's a couple of shows online. I don't know which ones. I've long since lost track of which ones were early. But if there's any of the shows that are late into March, that would be if they have the dates on them, those are the latter shows. The fans were really lovely. Like they made us care packages for each city. So if we were playing, streaming to Columbus, Ohio, or whatever it was, we'd get a care package of food and T-shirts and stickers and stuff from Columbus, Ohio for that show. And it was always nice to roll into the green room and see what had arrived from the fans. It was that brief time where people were still trying to figure out how to best support each other through the lockdown, right? People weren't surly. People were just like, all right, what can we do to make this easier on all of us and feel like we're all in this together? And it was really lovely, that part of it. I know I was sad. I live in New Orleans, and it's the only Mardi Gras that I've missed in a long time, that 2021 Mardi Gras. And we got Mardi Gras stuff on Mardi Gras Day, even though we weren't streaming to New Orleans per se. But on Mardi Gras Day, we got Mardi Gras fixins. And I can't even tell you what that did for my psyche, because I was really bummed out about being in Chicago during Mardi Gras. I'm so used to that being a time of year where I'm really, really happy to live in New Orleans. And to have missed it was a drag to begin with. And also to have missed it the prior year, basically, because that's when I was out with Kasim, right? So this was 2 years with no Mardi Gras for me, and I was really bumming about it. And so it was really lovely had a king cake, we had the whole green room decorated in purple, gold, and green. It was really lovely. So that wrapped up, and one night Jesse was on one of the screens. Jesse and Mary Lou were on the screen, and that was both incredibly emotional and also it made us feel good about what we were doing, that, like, especially me, like I felt like I was doing my job to hold the seat for Jesse, to keep it warm for him.
And that's all you're seeing. That's all you're seeing your place in the cog at that point, correct?
Yeah. So at that point, I'm considering the Clearly Human to be the end of the job for me. I've done my job. I can now go back to my normal lifestyle and be incredibly thankful for the opportunity that I had, but also extremely happy to give it back to Jesse to let him get back into the saddle. And so he was able to then do the one tour after that. And when Toddstock was rolling around, Toddstock 75, Jesse was getting sick again. And I got a call from Michelle to ask me, if I would still be interested in doing the job and doing Toddstock. I think she knew at that point that Jesse was not going to recover, but they were still putting up the brave face of, well, you do the Toddstock, and then we'll see if how Jesse does. But I think they already felt like it was not going to go well. And so we did Toddstock, and that was wild and woolly. And then after that,
just interject there for a second. So when you do this, and for the first time, and you're a Todd fan yourself also, but
yeah,
what about the specialness and the uniqueness of this community and the closeness and the connection to the artist and et cetera, and the love back from him, et cetera, et cetera?
It's really remarkable. You phrased it very well. It goes both directions. Todd has said specifically these words. He said, if somebody has taken the time and energy to learn all the words to your songs, how can you not give that person love? And I will see him outside the bus signing stuff and taking pictures for way longer than I would have the tolerance level to do something like that. Not that I'm, a bad guy or whatever, but I mean, he just put on a 2.5-hour show where he didn't stop moving.
And he's not 35.
Yeah. And I'm 63. At the end of that show, I need oxygen, and I'm stuck on a little 2-foot rug. He's not made of the same stuff as the rest of us. He's got this incredible energy level. But to see him that way with all the fans, it immediately sets this feeling among us that well, how if somebody wants a picture with lowly me, or wants to sit and chat with lowly me after the show, who am I to say, I got to get back to my bunk, or, there's a piece of cake waiting for me on the bus, because Todd's out there for an hour with them. So I've gotten to know so many of the fans along the way, and there's just lovely, lovely people. And, you see the same faces, over and over again. But it's always exciting too to see a new face that's so excited because it's the only show that they're going to on the tour. We see people, they go to 20 shows, whatever. But when you see that one person who it's the first, maybe it's even the first time they've seen Todd, period, they've got that look. We all know what that's like, because we're all music fans. Just because we're playing these shows doesn't mean we're not fans too. I can remember the first time I got close to some famous musician coming out of the venue, heading to the tour bus. Like, what an amazing feeling that was, and back in the 70s. So I'm not immune to that feeling. And I try to do, like, every night on stage, there's a moment where I try to soak it in, right? Where if it's something where I don't have to really worry too much about what I'm playing, right? I'll look up, I'll look around the stage, and I'll see it's Todd Rundgren. He's standing right there. And look, that's Kasim Sulton. He's right there. Oh, look, Prairie Prince is right behind me. Look at this. How cool is this? And so I do that every night, and it makes me feel closer to the fans, right? Because I've just had that experience, right? Where I'm saying, how cool is this that I'm with these amazing people? And they're having that just, 20 minutes after I just did, which is a really awesome thing. And Toddstock, I mean, talk about a wild way to be introduced into the family, as it were, right? And to have all the fans have unfettered access to you, really, which, who does that? This is not a thing that normal rock stars provide for their fans.
No, that's what's so special about all of this.
Yeah. And he wouldn't do it if he didn't feel like they were respectful, they were going to truly enjoy the experience, as opposed to it just being sort of like a dog and pony show. It's an amazing experience. I really, really enjoyed it. Now, it was my first time.
You come out of 2 or 3, whatever it is, 3 days together, like really, A, understanding each other better, and B, you always walk away understanding a little something more about Todd after being around him for 3 days.
Yeah, absolutely. In the middle of the pouring rain in the mud pit out there during Toddstock, where we're playing Brick House or something, and everybody, I'm looking down, and everybody's soaked, covered in mud, and has the biggest smile on their face. All we were worried about is Todd not slipping and falling on the stage. But when you see that and you realize, hey man, this is a special thing. It's not like a normal show. It's not like a normal relationship between the artist and the fans. It's a much, much closer relationship than I think most have. So yeah, you do learn a lot about Todd, but he's inscrutable. You don't learn everything about Todd. He's got a lot. There's a lot percolating in there at all times. Like I often wonder, what's he thinking about right now? Because he's always got something that he's cooking up.
Well, how about on that note, and I asked earlier, how about him as a band leader? Because he is very he's a perfectionist, as people have said, and he operates on a little higher level than most of us. So, like, how do you make that work? And is he tough? Is he like he there's expectations, right?
Yeah. So it's different than I would have thought, because he is a perfectionist, and he is, he's got incredible ears. He knows when something's not right. You're not going to get anything past him. But by the same token, he trusts us, and he lets us do pretty much whatever we want to do within reason, as long as it's true to the intent of the song. He doesn't nitpick over the parts we're playing unless something really jumps out to him as being inappropriate, right? Or if he hears a wrong chord or something like that. But it's almost to a fault that he lets us do our own thing. Obviously, like, Kasim's been in the band for 50 years as of this month. And so, Kaz knows, generally speaking, how Todd wants it. right? Because he's been down this road for 50 years. And so he lets us know, in sound checks and in rehearsals, he's like, hey, you should probably like do this an octave higher or whatever, because 5 tours earlier, Todd said he didn't like it in that octave. And, Kaz will remember that, and he'll give guidance. But we're all grown-ups, and we're not, we don't have to be wrangled too much. We're pretty good at doing our jobs. We understand what the job is. We understand that it's Todd's show and not our show. And our job is to provide the most comfortable, solid infrastructure for him to do his job without having to look over his shoulder at us.
Yeah, but your job and Jesse's job before you are a little different in that you're handling Todd's parts that he did for years on all those songs.
So, yeah, I mean, Jesse did a lot of that too. The way I look at it, there are things that Todd does in certain songs that, as somebody who grew up listening to those records, I consider those things gospel, right? Some little lick, something that to me became a hook in the song. I'm not so arrogant that I think I can do something better than Todd did on that record. I'll give a perfect example. There is a lick in the beginning of the second verse of Black and White. It's a simple lick, but man, it is so spot on. And that song without that lick would feel weird to me, And so I could put a different lick in there, but boy, that would be, to me, that would be sacrilege to lose that little hook that to me is just part of the song. It's not a disposable thing. So I will play a lot of stuff that Todd played, and I'll play it verbatim because I think it deserves to be treated as an integral part of the music. I could just blow and play other stuff, but why? Why, when you get it right the first time, would I second guess it and do it differently? But there are certain things where, you can tell that Todd's intent was to make this part loose, in which case I'll feel a little freer to make it loose. I tend to play the composed things, composed guitar solos, right? So like Love the Common Man, like you could sing that guitar solo, right? Everybody knows what it sounds like. I'm not going to play a different guitar solo than that. I'm going to play that composed solo. But in other places, I feel a certain freedom because the music says you have the freedom, not because I'm just going to take it, right? And we just did a really interesting thing, and this is not secret because everybody knows now, it's on the internet and whatever, but spoiler warning for those of you who don't want to know certain things about what's coming up on this tour. But we did an acoustic set in Japan that Todd said we're going to, he has already said we're going to do an acoustic set within the show. And in that acoustic set, I have to play mandolin on a song. And I had to make the part up because there's no mandolin on that song. So here I am in an interesting position to compose some part for a song that has been played the same way for many, many, many years, for 50 years, right? And now I am in a position where I get to add something completely different and new to it. That's incredible trust on his part.
That's an interesting comment. That also explains, again, for a layman, that explains the lounge album, that Todd had to really reinvent those songs. He's not just playing them in lounge style.
Yeah, and a lot of that too was Jesse. Jesse was a real integral part of that. of making that happen. And, I can totally see the perspective of somebody who's had to play the same songs for 50 years to want to mess around with them. Boy, do I get that. That is, because we'll play the same songs for 100 nights. By the end of that, we'd like to play them differently. We'd like to do something to it. But so imagine 50 years of doing it. But he's pretty good about not messing with stuff too much. Like I've seen lots of artists who take a lot more liberties with their music because they're just sick and tired of playing it a certain way. But I will say that probably a lot of that is because he did make it the way he wanted it to be, because he was in charge of those records. He didn't have some producer telling him, no, we're not going to do it like that. We're going to do it like a waltz and twice as slow as you think you want to play it. He never had to deal with that. He made the record the way he wanted. And so consequently, it still feels right for him to play it the way the record was. Now,
that's a big thing.
With a twist is a whole different thing. That's a concept. That's an entirely different thing. But he's pretty happy playing the songs the way that they have always been.
So let me ask you, okay, so after Toddstock, when as we get into towards Jesse's health turning again, does Michelle or does anybody come to you and then start to talk to you about, that you slide into the role on a more permanent basis, or how does that all go down?
So I think the, Todd is in general a path of least resistance kind of guy, in that if it's working, we don't really need to change it. And I think he's happy with the job that I've done. And nobody's signed a contract that says I'm in the band for 10 years. That's not how it works. And tomorrow he could announce a tour with a totally different band. He could do it. He's done it before. He's done odd permutations of the band, the Johnson tour and the various other things, but I don't see, I haven't at my quarterly feedback from my management team, there's never been an HR guy in the room that said, you need to do these things, or you're going to get a bad review. I think we are all pretty good about self-policing and making sure the show is good and making sure we do the best job we can possibly do. And as long as I can, be there to be part of it, I'm very, very happy. The band gets along remarkably well, and we'll be out for 6-7 months and still be having breakfast together, and that says a lot. There's lots of bands where the bass player and the drummer enter from different sides of the stage, leave on different sides of the stage, have different buses. We're not like that. We all have a good time together, and the crew too. It's a very, very good unit.
Let's go back to the Zappa stuff for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Because you said you'd play it, you in learning the material, and then eventually you had a chance to play with some or many of the guys in the band. Yeah. So I'll give you my 6 degrees of separation really quickly. Every day after school, I would get on the T, which is the trolley system in Boston, and go from Newton to downtown Boston to my job at Evans Furs at Jordan Marsh, where I was the stock boy, and there was a group of salespeople there, most of whom had worked there for 20 years and 30 years, and one of them for 40 years. One of the ladies, her name was Hazel Consalvi, and Hazel was a lovely, lovely woman. She was kind of a surrogate mother to me, in that she would always pull me aside and ask me how I was doing and give me motherly advice, whether I wanted it or not. She had 2 children, a son, Brian, who I became very friendly with. Brian was a great, 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 great guy. Gentle soul, beautiful, beautiful boy. and he and I were quite good friends. We bonded over our love of cannabis. Hazel also had a daughter who she was so proud of and so much loved by the name of Dale Consalvi. And Hazel would regale us and keep us posted on the ongoings of her daughter, Dale Consalvi. In 1975, Dale Consalvi was named Playboy Playmate of the Year, Play Bunny of the Year, I guess you would call it, at the Playboy Club in downtown Boston. She was an incredibly beautiful, sexy little girl. She stood about 5 feet tall, skinny as a rail, and she had a beauty and a Hollywood likeness that harkened back to the days of Marlena Dietrich and Greta Garbo and folks like that. Dale Consalvi soon went out to Hollywood, where she went to the Playboy Mansion and was interviewed by Hugh Hefner. And shortly thereafter, Dale Consalvi, our Dale Consalvi, and Hazel used to, as I said, regale us constantly with what was going on in her daughter's life. Dale Consalvi then ran into and met Frank Zappa, one of our friggin' heroes, Frank Zappa. And next thing we know, out comes this album, Joe's Garage. And lo and behold, who's the female vocal play? I think the character was Mary, playing Mary throughout the whole album. Our own Dale Consalvi. Well, another one of the guys in the band was a drummer, quite frankly, one of the best drummers in the fucking world, if you want my opinion. His name was Terry Bozzio. Terry Bozzio played with Zappa, an amazing drummer, and you can see where the story is going. Terry Bozzio and Dale Consalvi fell in love and became Mr. and Mrs. Terry Bozzio. And after a short time, Dale and Terry, along with Warren Cucurullo and Patrick Ahern, other guys that they had met in Frank Zappa's orbit, all left the band to form their own, a band called Missing Persons. And Dale Bozzio and Terry Bozzio and Missing Persons had one hit after another in the period between 1980 and 1985.
Well, the band has changed a lot since I've been in the band. When I joined the band, it was mostly sort of straight up big band arrangements, and I say straight, they're weird still, of Frank's music, where the goal, I think, you'd have to ask Ed, to confirm this, but my perspective was that Ed, as a Zappa fan, felt that there was so much beauty in Frank's music that was obscured intentionally by Frank to make it more strident or make it more, in your face, or whatever he wanted to do, whatever he wanted to get across. Every time something was too pretty, he would want to ugly it up. And there's some just incredibly breathtakingly beautiful music there that I think Ed really wanted to draw to the forefront in these arrangements, to make people who said, oh man, I don't like Frank Zappa's music, hear and go, wait, that's Frank Zappa's music? That's beautiful. And the band has always tried not to be like a Frank Zappa cover band, right? It's always tried to do something different with the music. But when you play with the alumni, you don't really have rehearsal time. You've got to keep things in the form of the original so that they know what to do. And for the most part, that's how we've done it. But we've had everybody from Jimmy Carl Black and Napoleon Murphy Brock and Ike Willis and Denny Wally and Ray White and all these people that come and play with the band. each one is a little different in how they want to approach it. And some are like, no, 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 I want to learn your version of it, or, do this. And we've done so many gigs with Napoleon at this point that Napoleon is now used to our arrangements, but we always have to remind him how it goes, because it's not like the record. And we did an amazing show, a couple of shows with Denny Wally, who was in both Frank's band and in Captain Beefheart's band. I brought him, he came to the show, the Todd show last year that we did in Atlanta. And I introduced him to Todd. I was like, Todd, this is Denny Wally. Denny was in both Frank Zappa's band and Captain Beefheart's band. And Todd goes, and you're still alive? Because talk about two of the most intense jobs you could ever have.
Yep.
But we did a couple of shows with Denny that we mashed up all this Beefheart music with all the Zappa music. And Denny was such a good sport and, muscled his way through all of these arrangements. And it was one of the most wonderful musical experiences I've ever had, because I was not as conversant with the Beefheart material, because I came to Beefheart really late. Because I remember as a teenager listening to Trout Mask or whatever and just not getting it. Like, it just wasn't for me. And I didn't go back to that stuff until like my late 30s probably. And when I had to do these arrangements, I went deep into the Beefheart music that we were doing. And man, there's so much in there. It's really cool. And to be able to play that on stage with Denny was really, really enjoyable, really wonderful. We had the luxury of being the headliner for the Zappanale Festival, which is the big Frank Zappa festival in Germany, for the 30th anniversary. 30th or 20th? 30th, I guess. 30th anniversary. And that was wild. And another one of those things where you look at the fans and go, you people are just way beyond what normal fans would be like. The Zappa fans are really something else. And there was a hurricane coming through, and we were closing, the Saturday night, the headline spot, and the storm was going to come right when we were supposed to play. And so we'd been there for like 4 days, and now we weren't going to be able to play because this hurricane was going to come through. And we're getting weather updates, and the stage is just covered in plastic, but the plastic's blowing off, so all our equipment's getting wet. And we're sitting in a tent out there in the back, and they said, you guys, you're not going to be able to go on until like the storm's not going to pass until like 11:30 at night or midnight or something. And we're like, well, there's not going to be anybody left out there. It's pouring rain. There's not going to be any fans out there. So it doesn't matter anymore. And they're like, no, you don't understand. They will wait there until dawn. And so I'm like, all right, well, and we went out at 11:30 or midnight. The stage has got an inch of water on it. Everybody's soaked. And we look out, and it's just packed with people elbow to elbow who were not going to leave until we played that music. And it was just incredible. Another incredible night where you look at the fans and go, man, you people are really over the top in the best way.
Great. So, but Frank seemingly, again, as a layman, Frank seemingly kind of thought in symphonic and orchestral terms. So that music really does lend itself to reimagining in big band terms, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in fact, talk about somebody who would reinvent the music all the time and would never play it the same way twice. That was Frank, because he would tweak the music to the ensemble that he had. So if he had a band that was structured more like a rock band, he would play that piece like it's a rock band piece. If he had a big band with horns in it and everything else, he would play it like it was a jazz big band piece. He was not precious about the recording, right? And I think that ultimately is is why that material does work in the context of the big band, is because it was structured to be flexible like that. He just made the adjustments necessary at the time of making the record to make it work with whatever band he had that was recording it. But that wasn't necessarily the way he heard it in his head. That was the way he made it for convenience purposes. And the greatest example of that is the last album that he was able to make before the Synclavier album, before Civilization Phase 3, which was the Yellow Shark, which was an orchestra playing all of his orchestral music correctly. You know, that was the hard part, because he would hire these professional orchestras who looked down on him as a composer, and they would phone in the performances and they would make mistakes because these are hard things. But they wouldn't care, you know, it's like, well, what difference does it make? Some rock guy. But this orchestra took it seriously. And Frank was already in the late stages of cancer at that point. But the look on his face, you know, this is somebody who never had a moment without snark in his whole life. And the look on his face, watching that orchestra take his music seriously and play it correctly, was a look that no one had ever seen on his face before. It was a joy and almost a relief of having the prior 30 years of people fighting him at every turn to get to play the music correctly, right? All of a sudden, it just washing over him and him hearing it the way he heard it in his head. And Ali Askin, who did a lot of the orchestration, was at that Zappanale that we headlined that I was talking about. And so I got to talk to him quite a bit about it and thank him, you know, for his part in it, because it's incredible. And then I got to perform with him where he ran the whole band as if it was a pure Zappa improv thing. He gave us all hand signals and he was wildly conducting, and I got to play in an orchestra with him conducting, which was a really, really great experience.
Wow. All right, let me go. I want to go back to a few more things before I let you go. And on one of your behind the scene videos, this I found extremely interesting. You talked about, going back to the preparation thing, about being aware of your stage, your choreography, and how you're hearing things. If you could just give us a couple minutes on that, because that, I think, really nicely sums up what you were saying at the top about what your dad's advice and everything.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. You think you've practiced things, and then when you walk in to go play it, you realize you never practiced something standing up, or you never practiced something after the song that you're going to play it after in the show. You just practiced it out in the air by itself. And you realize that moving from song A to song B all of a sudden requires you to do certain things, both in your physical position and with your equipment and stuff like that, that it never even occurred to you. And we have rehearsals, but our rehearsals, like before a tour, our rehearsals assume that you're already ready, right? And the rehearsal is to iron out technical issues, make sure everybody's agreeing on the note that they're supposed to sing, you know, all of that stuff, not to learn the music. You know, you're expected to already know that part, right? So, you know, you're going through all this when you're like, I'm sitting here in my studio and I have my guitar and I'm working through everything. I will take the last week before the tour starts or before the rehearsals start and set up a little tape area in my studio here and put the mic stand where it's going to be when I'm on stage, you know, put my in-ears in. I won't be listening through speakers because on the tour I'll have my in-ears in, and make sure that I'm not stepping outside of my range, make sure all my equipment fits the right way next to the mic stand, and I'm not like doing a weird tap dance with my feet, all of that stuff. You think, you'll figure that out on stage. But you know what? You don't want to figure it out on stage, because on stage, you want to be able to concentrate on playing it right. You want to give the best show possible. I often think there's definitely a person that I'm looking at right down here that this is the only show that they're going to see. And if I don't give that person the best show that I can give them, then I'm not doing my job, because that's the only show that they're going to see. So you want every show to feel good. You know perfectly well that every show is not the same. They're going to be different. You're going to make different mistakes than you made last night or whatever it is. But you want to make the effort to have every show be great, right? And if you're worried about like where the wire goes, or like these practical things like the strap feeling funny or whatever, you're taken out of the ability to give a great show. And I want to not worry about any of that stuff. And just
so what do you do when that does happen? Like, you do all your practice, you're ready to go.
Yeah,
it seems happens to work in what your dress rehearsal and your sound check, but then shit happens on stage. So now what? So now
stuff
what's
breaks.
The process?
Stuff breaks. This past year, we did a show in it was around Denver. It wasn't the Red Rock show. It was another Colorado show. I can't remember where it was. But anyway, we were playing with Heart, right? Playing in a big arena. So we were playing Open My Eyes. So after the guitar solo, Todd is still holding the last note of the guitar solo. And so by myself, I play the lick. I play da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. It's like a big, big moment where it's just me. I am the only person playing anything in the room. And right before I'm about to play this, my whole rig goes out and it's just silence in my hands. Ouch. And I have literally a split second to figure out what to do. And I turn and look at Kasim and I point at my guitar and it's like dead. So Kaz plays the lick and saved me, right? But that's kind of what you do, is you look for help. Like I'll call one of the crew over or something, like you can't, you're in the middle of playing, you're in the middle of a show, you can't try and like diagnose, right? You just gotta like ask for help and get out of get out of it the best way you can.
What about if your monitors fuck up, or if you have feedback and they have to come out? Yeah. How much does that screw you up and everything?
We play the show enough that I can play without any of that. Like if I could take all my ears out, take the monitors out, whatever, and just listen to what the sound is in the house. It'll sound like this, but I've played the show enough, right, that you can figure it out. Where it gets weird is when the equipment doesn't do the thing that it's done the last 100 nights. You just step on something and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. And it happened, it happened maybe 3 or 4 times in the last couple of tours. Not a lot, but it always happens at the most inopportune moment. Like one night on the dual guitar solo in I Saw the Light, when Todd and I are playing together, the rig went out and I looked at him and I was just like this, there's nothing I can do. I got nothing here. It's just no sound. And here's where Todd's a great boss. He's fine when stuff like that happens. He doesn't get mad. He doesn't, he won't be fine if that happens 2 shows in a row, because that means we didn't do our due diligence afterwards to figure out why it went wrong, right? And that's a good boss. He understands stuff is going to go south, but he also understands that it's our job to get it right the next time. And we do, as a rule, So that's comforting to know.
All right, let me throw out some names of some other people you've worked with, and any
Yeah.
reminiscence, thank you, or stories, or a little bit about how wonderful they are, these people too. Let's do a couple of other Todd friends first. How about Paul Shaffer?
I just did a show with Paul a week ago. Paul, he's a trip, man, because he's Paul Shaffer all the time. Like, he's never not in character. And he is a guy that just loves to play. He just wants to play all the time. He doesn't care whether you're famous or not famous or this or that. He just loves playing. I ran into him on the street. This is now like 20 years ago, but it was right after, I think it was right after Letterman ended, which is probably what, 15 years ago? Yeah, something. Anyway,
Yeah. And that's about the time that Todd produced that album as well. Yeah.
Right. I ran into him on the street and said, "Hey, Paul, how you doing?" He goes, "Hey, man, you never call me for anything." I was like, "Oh, Paul, what am I going to do? Call you for like a $50 gig?" He's like, "Man, a gig is a gig. Let's do it. Come on, call me. I'll tell you no if I can't do it." And I was like, "You're right. I should just call you because you're great." And we just did this, an ALS benefit last week. It was an incredible night. I was the MD for the house band. And my house band had just incredible musicians, Oz Noy and Lee Finkelstein from the Blues Brothers band, and Leon Pendarvis, the MD of Saturday Night Live, and it's just incredible musicians. Paul Adamy from the Palermo band. And Paul he kept just like hovering around the B3 organ that we had there, and like just wanting to play and wanting to join in. And he did a duet with Carla Thomas of Tramp, which was Carla and Otis Redding. And he did the Otis Redding part, but he did it as Paul Shaffer. He's not going to be like Otis Redding. And it was so funny, man. It was just wonderful. And he's a great guy. He's just a great hang. Good dude.
Nice, great musician. What about another friend of the community who we unfortunately also lost last year, is Jill Sobule?
Yeah, that is still, I mean, it's been a year now, and it's still shocking. But I met Jill, I'm going to say probably, it's got to be shortly after Things Here Are Different. What year was that? 93, 90?
Thereabouts,
when was that?
Yeah,
shortly after. Because we were doing this show at the Bottom Line, and I was in the house band, and it was like once a month, and we would have New York musicians come in, and they would each do one song or two songs with the house band, and then you'd grab touring musicians that were coming through that happened to be there that week and try and get them to do it. And it'd be anybody from like, Levon Helm and Fountains of Wayne and, whoever was around. And Jill came and did a couple of like British Invasion tunes and just killed. And one of the things that was amazing to me about Jill, just incredible songwriter, just so charming, and just wonderful person to be around. But her guitar playing was so weird and great. Like, talk about somebody that had their own voice. Her guitar playing was her own voice. Absolutely. She didn't sound like anybody else. She just did the thing that she did. And it always sounded amazing. And I just, I remember it was some show up up in Connecticut that I did with her. Because I did several shows with her where I like accompanied her, and we were backstage like strumming through some songs, and she wanted to do some song that was not one that we had played before, and she showed me how she played it, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do the thing that she did so like fluidly and easily. I would have had to sit down and practice that thing for hours to get the particular picking technique together. And I mean, she did her own thing, and her own thing was just wonderful. She was a light.
Does that just continually amaze you when you come across that there are this many different musicians who have their own thing that nobody else does? Like, no,
I think that's the thing we love about
possible.
Yeah, I think that's the thing we love about it, is that music is an infinity. You know, it is the the funny thing to say is, oh, there's only 12 notes. I mean, in Western music, although Angime de Patrine would argue with that, but the permutations for the notes and the rhythms are literally infinite. And we're always blown away when we hear somebody that does something that's unique. But the fact is, any day, any given day, you can be presented with somebody who's unique, because they just have to not try to be somebody else, right? As long as you just do your thing and not try to duplicate something somebody else has done, it's gonna come out unique. I think this is the thing that makes us angry about a lot of music that we hear, is it's so clearly just cookie cuttered, because either some producer or some label or whatever it is says, make a record that sounds like this and we'll put it out, right? Not make the best record you can, make a record that sounds like this because we know how to market this. You know, Todd certainly has been unmarketable
from that, boy.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and any hits that he has had have been an accident. He'll be the first one to tell you. And it's because he didn't sit down to write a hit. He sat down to do the thing that amused him at the moment, right? Or that spoke the truth that he felt at the moment, or that sounded beautiful to him at the moment, not to please anyone else. And so anything, any success he has, he gets to own completely, which is an awesome place to be.
Really? Okay, so midway through the career of the Yankee star Bernie Williams, we started to hear smackings about this guy's a jazz guitarist and maybe even loves playing guitar as much as or more than he loves baseball. So tell us about that.
Yeah, Bernie he's a lovely, lovely guy. So I did a lot of things with a guitarist named Gil Paris, who's a incredible jazz guitarist, old friend. And I'm not entirely sure how Bernie and Gil connected in the first place, but Bernie started working with Gil a lot. And I think part of it was Bernie was really trying to both improve his playing, right, by just gigging, and also do enough performing as a guitar player that maybe people would start allowing him to not be ex-Yankee Bernie Williams playing the guitar, but be guitar playing Bernie Williams, and he's managed to do it, which is incredible. He's really developed a lot as a musician. He's really a lovely player. And so I used to do gigs with Gil and Bernie on the off, occasion. And going back to like what I said about Todd, about being generous with the fans, Bernie we'd be playing at some bar in not even New York City, in Elmsford, New York or something. And everybody wanted their moment with Bernie at that bar after the show. And Bernie would stay there and he would take pictures with people and he would sign autographs and he would do all of that stuff because he understood that he basically hit the life lotto, you know, by being a Yankee and being a champion Yankee, right? Where he never had to buy a drink for himself for the rest of his life, right? But
right. But do you think one
very,
has to grapple in that situation with, you know, I want to be here as Bernie the jazz musician, but they're all coming to see Bernie the baseball player.
no, as long, you know, I think his perspective was as long as they were respectful of the music while he was playing, then they get to get that extra. Okay. Now, I will say the only time I ever saw him refuse an autograph was for the best of reasons. It was a show at the Tarrytown Music Hall, which is, we're playing with Todd this year. And it was a Gil Parrish show. And Paul Shaffer was actually on it, and Randy Brecker was on it. And it was an amazing show. But it was Gil's show. And Bernie was just there to watch the show. And he was sitting next to me. I was actually recording the show, and he was sitting next to me. And he came through the balcony to sit down. And everybody was like, Bernie, can I get a picture? Can I get it? And he's like, no. I'm here to see Gil. You focus your attention on Gil. This is his night, not mine. And that's the right way to handle it. You know, he gets it. Bernie's a great guy.
Nice. All right, last one, and then I will wrap up with you. So one of the most lovely people I've ever interviewed is Onnie McIntyre of the Average White Band, and so you
love Onnie.
Paths somewhat. So tell me about them.
So I just did a show, the same show that ALS Benefit AWB played, but I had played with them a year earlier. But the way that happened was, so Cliff Lyons, saxophone player in the Ed Palermo Big Band, is also in Average White Band for the last, I don't know, decade or whatever, maybe more. I'd have to look up Cliff's resume. And AWB effectively retired a little over a year ago, but they wanted to do this benefit a year ago. And I guess I was doing the benefit, playing with several other people, the big band and my band and a couple of other people. And well, okay, so now I got to back up further now. Sorry. 2018, maybe 2017, 18, they were doing a live album. And they needed horn charts written for this performance because they were going to have an expanded horn section because they only had the two horn players, two sax players normally, but they were going to have a 5-piece horn section or a 6-piece horn section, and they needed horn charts written. So Cliff in the big band calls me and said, hey, would you be interested in writing horn charts for AWB? And I was like, are you kidding? That's like a dream job. And he said, great. So I'm going to have Fred Vigdor, who was the other sax player, call you and work out the details. So I did a bunch of the horn charts for the album that they did in 2018 called Inside Out. So fast forward 6-7 years later, they're going to do this benefit and come out of retirement for this benefit. But they had been used to just playing with Onnie, just with one guitar at this point. And Pick Up the Pieces famously has two very distinct guitar parts. One being the that part, and the other all the funky strummy stuff. So they said, hey, we're doing this, your chart of Pick Up the Pieces, which is way more complicated than the normal version. You're the only one that knows it. Would you sit in and play on Pick Up the Pieces so we have two guitars? And I was like, oh, this is a dream to play Pick Up the Pieces with Average White Band. So I go to do this, and Onnie shows up, and Onnie, he's he's like a little elf. He's just a wonderful guy, wonderful presence. But he walks in shuffling with his guitar case, and Onnie's been at this for 50 some odd years, more 60 some odd years. He opens up his guitar case, and it's like a rat's nest of cables and pedals and stuff like that. And so he goes, what am I going to plug in? And so I said, all right, well, that Fender Deluxe over there, that'll be yours. You're going to get your pedals set up over there. And he lifts it up like it's a string of fish, and all the pedals just fall apart. And he just looks at me, and he's like, well, now what are we going to do? I said, oh, well, I mean, I can help you set them up. What order do you like the pedals in? He goes, I don't know, because he usually has a guy that sets them up. So I said, all right, well, here's how I would do it. And then I said, do you want to get plugged into the normal channel or the bright channel? And he goes, normal? I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. But then he puts on his guitar, and you're just like, what is going on with this guy? He puts on his guitar, and the funk just comes like magic out of him. It's just wonderful, wonderful. And so we do this benefit again this year, and I fall into the same role of being second guitarist for AWB. And Onnie comes out. This time he's got an actual pedal board, but nothing's plugged in right. He doesn't know why. Nothing's coming out. And so he's like, I need your help again. So I go over, tearing apart his pedal board and trying to make a sound. But again, once he gets in there, it's just funky Scottish man.
Great story. Great band. So, okay, lastly, so now you're coming up on many decades of this. So how do you reflect back on this life of doing this? What would your dad say with the advice that he gave you and looking at where you are and everything? I mean, all of that.
I do think about that a lot. My dad passed away in 2006, and I was on my way to Italy for a gig. And it was clear that my dad didn't have more than 24 hours left. And I said, Dad, I'm not going to go. I'm going to stay and stay with you. And he goes, you absolutely will not. You have a gig. You can't miss the gig. You got to go for your gig. And like that was, that's musician logic there, right? A gig is a gig. You signed up for that gig. You can't bail out of it. I don't care what the situation is. And I think that's, that goes part and parcel with a lot of the things that I learned about the business, about being prepared, being relatively low maintenance, showing up on time, all of these things that are not very rock and roll, but have served me very well, getting gigs over guys that play better than I do. I know what my limitations are, and so I try and stay with them because they kind of define the way I play, right? I'm not Jesse. I'm not Todd. I'm not any of those people. I'm me. And so a lot of times where I could play something, wonky and showy, I'd rather just play something textural that makes me go, ooh, listen to that. That's cool, because that's more me than doing something flashy. I can do that when it's necessary, but that's me pretending to be somebody else. So I just feel like I get to the same way I said, Todd gets to own every success he's had. I kind of get to own mine because I didn't strive to outdo anybody for it or whatever. I just did my thing, and by the confluence of events was presented with opportunities that I was able to succeed in. And it's not because I was driven to do it or whatever. I love music, and I love playing, and I love playing with great musicians. But I also understand it's a job, and I do all the job parts, I think, pretty well, you know.
And there is a right place, right time aspect to all this, right? I mean, it's not just
yeah. So, you know, you're
you are.
always, any success is a confluence of you doing whatever the thing is that you do well, and a line on the graph hitting you that has the opportunity in it. They could easily have just gone this way and never encountered one another. And that would be fine. You know, I don't know in what alternate universe, like I'm like driving a steam engine, or in what alternate universe I'm in Paul McCartney's band, or in what, you know, like, who knows, you know. So you appreciate every single one of these opportunities, and try not to take any of them for granted. And, you know, this morning we actually had a Zoom call with the whole band, Todd's band, and just talking about some logistics that we had to do. And I look at all those guys, and every single one of them is in the same position. You know, every single one of them had incredible confluences of ability and opportunity. And some have insane ability. Gil Asias is a musician like I've never seen before. He's an insane musician.
You guys all say that.
And somehow, some way, Gil was going to have lots of arrows crossing through his timeline, because he's able to do anything, right? So anything that would have crossed his timeline, he could have said, I can do that. But what kind of crazy musician must you be to have to learn all the Utopia material that you'd never heard before in a couple of weeks, and then go on tour with it? Well, what is that? Who does that? That's insane. So I look at every one of these guys, and I say every single one of them has this thing that is that combination of luck of the draw and ability to take advantage of that luck of the draw. So I don't consider myself having, you know, something special happening to me, because every musician that works has that. But there's so many that don't get to that point. And I'm not ignorant of that, and I'm not dismissive of that. Like, I am very, very thankful for all of the incredible things that I've been able to do in my life. And also, at the same time, still looking forward to lots more of them, you know, because this is not, for me, this is not something that I would ever want to retire from. As long as somebody's going to pay me to jump around in tight pants on a stage, I'm doing it. And retiring to me sounds awful.
Well, especially with what you're doing, man. So, Bruce McDaniel, it has been an absolute pleasure spending some time with you. Thank you for your openness and stories and everything, and for joining our community. We're so happy to have you.
I can't wait to see everybody out there, and you know, we're all chomping to get out there and do it again for you. And we're going to do a really exciting new show for you. So I'm looking forward to everybody seeing it.
Can't wait, man. Thank you so much for your time and spending some time with us. We'll let you go, and you have yourself a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Have a great night.